All right, well, we will start here in just a minute. So, David, I'm seeing you on video. Ian, I'm seeing you. Excellent.
Let me just... Well, it looks a bit void cam feed, doesn't it?
Yeah, I kind of wish I had one of those props for the desktop.
It's nice and atmospheric, which is cool.
All right. So I will just make a quick post for everyone in the chat to reiterate where we were going to start the film, and then we will get the Q&A going.
Great.
All right. Okay, well, let's begin. Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming to our watch party of Blade Runner, the final cut today, with special guest Ian Nathan. Hello, Ian.
Hi, everybody.
Applause all around. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Well, I'm here on lockdown, basically, so I'm not going anywhere. But, it's an absolute pleasure to join you in the virtual verse.
Yeah. We've been having these watch parties for different movies. And just like Robin was saying earlier, we've been building up to this one because this is the final day of the In Search of Tomorrow campaign. And what better way to end it on than one of the greatest 80s sci-fi movies of all time, for sure.
Absolutely. And one of the greatest sci-fi movies of all time, not just 80s, You can make an argument it may be the key sci-fi work. Maybe we'll talk about that later. But, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, today... we're all here. I'm Andrew Hawkins. I'm an associate producer on In Search of Tomorrow. We're also here with the director, David Weiner.
Hello.
So, Ian, tell us a little bit about yourself. You've joined us before as a special guest on the Advisor Circle talking about Blade Runner, but go into a little bit of your background, Empire Magazine, whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, I'm a writer of film books. I'm an author and a film journalist. Have been for quite a long while. We were talking earlier about when you first saw Blade Runner. I actually saw Blade Runner in 1981 in the cinema, on its original release in the UK. That's how far back I go. Obviously, I was quite young then, so I wasn't a journalist at that point. But it's one of those kind of key films, actually, that led me toward the path I've gone on, that kind of obsessive need to kind of talk and write about film and understand film, because it's such an important part of my life. And I got lucky enough to work on a student newspaper and become the film critic there, and really got the bug and really understood there was a possibility this could be a job.
Yeah.
You could write about film. And a few years went past, and I got involved in Empire Magazine. I don't know if anybody knows Empire Magazine, but it's the UK's biggest film magazine.
And it made it over here to the States. It's one of the, great magazines for film criticism, for editorials, film journalism. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it was born of a kind of an attitude toward film where it was a shared experience, and it wasn't about being highfalutin or academic about film, and it wasn't being cynical like the newspaper critics can be, it's pull a film down. Empire was all about going to the cinema, and that was always important to me. When I first joined Empire, I tell this story, I was taken to a kind of conference, and I was actually a couple of days in, didn't know how to turn my computer on. And the publisher then was sort of giving a big talk about the future and all that. And he turned to me, the poor young lad who just joined, and said, "Is Empire a film magazine?" And I thought it was the most preposterous question. I thought, well, of course it is. Look at it. It's full of films. It's what we talk about. And he said, "It's not." And I was sort of dumbfounded. Clearly, I was just his stooge for what he wanted to say. And he said it was a magazine about film going. He said, we don't live in Hollywood. We don't hang out with movie stars. We meet them as part of the job, and we have great experiences. We visit sets and live a wonderful life. Don't get me wrong. But fundamentally on Empire, and this is who I am as a writer, it was about film going. It was about experiencing film. It was about going to the opening night of the movie, watching it with your friends, and going straight to the pub afterwards just to talk about it, to get it out of your system. All the niggles, all the joys, all the things you wanted to think about. And that's been my life, and it's been fantastic. I was at Empire for 25 years. I still write for Empire. I did an interview with Sigourney Weaver last week. She's in lockdown, and she's okay. Rest assured about that. And I've written books since then. The first book I wrote was about Alien, another very precious film to me, a book called Alien Vault. It was very popular. And
I've got it.
Thank you. I hope you enjoy it. It's full of great stuff, and its success really helped open up my career as an author alongside being a journalist.
And also, you're in Memory, the documentary about Alien, which is fantastic. So, yeah, that's another film that I think, talking about Ridley Scott, it's going to be great getting into his impact on sci-fi today for sure.
Absolutely. And right now, actually, I've coming out later this year, I've written a biography, a new book on Ridley Scott.
Nice.
As one subject. That's coming out this November. There's a little plug there. You'll forgive me.
No, we're more than happy to share everything that you've got coming up. So we'll continue even at the end of the movie. But yeah, please.
So, I've been living and breathing Blade Runner again recently over the last couple of years, going back into it. And, and I did cover, we're talking about this, Blade Runner 2049 for Empire. I went out to the set, which was in Budapest, strangely. And it was fascinating and fantastic to see how they were engaging with it and its legacy. And it was almost like a burden. Denis Villeneuve, who obviously just made Dune, which I'm sure we're all very excited about seeing.
Yes, definitely. I'm interested in seeing his take on Dune for sure.
Absolutely. Really smart guy and a really passionate guy. And he was, because the thing he just wanted to impress, he goes, I am like you. He kept saying, I adore Blade Runner. But he says, I can't make the film, the sequel, with that in my head. I have to get it out of my head and sort of and I have to make a film that's mine. And, I do get that. And I do like the sequel very much. But it's not Blade Runner, and there's something unique about Blade Runner that he understood. And we're going to talk a lot about it as we come. But it's, a film that's just stayed with me from that time I saw it in 1981. It's kind of nagged me and it's meant a lot to me, and I've returned to it at different times, watching different cuts and coming at it from different angles. I think when I first saw it, I was a bit perplexed. I was 11 years old and I was going to see it because Han Solo was in it, basically.
Yeah.
And I wanted to see a new film with Han Solo in, and he wasn't like Han Solo at all. He was kind of miserable and it was raining a lot and I was
weathered and worn out and roughed up. I
didn't quite get it then. But it definitely made an impression on me, just the look of it. And I remember talking about, that with my parents about, I've never seen a film look like that. And then they would talk to me about what film noir is and the kind of legacy that Scott was drawing on,
Yeah, because it's a movie that opens up to so much when you really start digging into it. You see all the influences. You really get an interesting breadth of film history behind it.
Did your parents kind of guide you by the hand? It sounds like they were very film aware. What was their influence on you growing up in terms of your film appreciation?
Kind of quite different. I grew up in the 70s and was a teen in the 80s. And film for me was, a great pleasure in terms, it was always an event. It wasn't available, even VHS wasn't available in the 70s. So when films came on, it was a significant thing. And my parents were very good at kind of hyping them up. Nice. It was like Bond movies. They were just like, Dr. No is going to be on Sunday night. And they would sort of build it up for me. So I would be like in some kind of frenzy by Sunday night, and somehow the films always lived up to the billing, And as I got older, they started talking about different things to me. My mum was much more interested in artier films and the kind of whole film culture. So he wanted to talk to me about French films, and I wasn't that receptive to that as a young age. My dad was much more about going to the movies and going out and seeing things and. All the films I saw with him, anything. But we religiously went to Bond movies and the big summer movies. And I saw Moonraker 7 times in one summer.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
That is a good thing. I stand by Moonraker.
I'm just going to interrupt. Can we come off video because there's a limit on?
Okay.
So we're
let's move to
audio so everyone else can join. Thank you.
No
Absolutely.
problem.
I'm just turn that off. Can you hear me still?
Yep.
Sure can. We're all set. So, Ian, we had a couple of questions in the group for you. A couple of people wanted to ask, first off, Aaron, what are the religious/spiritual influences, if any, on the film? And then Bobby wanted to ask you, what's your favorite cut of the movie? I know you picked Final Cut, so I'm interested to hear your perspective on that before we get into it.
Yeah. On the first question, that's a very good question. as we'll probably talk about a bit, there, while Ridley Scott is the dominant visualist involved in Blade Runner, Hampton Fancher is the screenwriter, and he was on it before Ridley Scott. And obviously, Hampton Fancher was adapting Philip K. Dick, so there's a stage before even Hampton Fancher's screenplay. And Philip K. Dick had a very kind of mystical view of the universe, a slightly paranoid one, assisted maybe by a lot of amphetamines and a very complicated life.
Sure.
But certainly he had imbued it with an idea of what is it that makes humans human and machines machines if they looked identical to one another and responded in the same way. What is the thing that's different? And is it the soul? Is it the existence of a soul? And in fact, I think that's Roy Batty's great dilemma, is that, as his great speech at the end, what he wants from Descartes is a recognition that he's existed, that he's had a soul.
There's very much a sense of existentialism and really that longing and search for meaning.
Yeah, I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. And he's saying, I've experienced what he's saying. I've seen these things out there in the universe, dreams. And does that make him human? And in fact, you kind of think it does. It's a strange film. It's about what it means to be human, actually, Blade Runner. It's not about what it means to be a machine at all. It's about the other way around.
What does it mean to be alive? Definitely.
Yes, absolutely. And I think Scott brought some of that too. I think there is in Ridley Scott's films this kind of element of fairy tale in almost all of them. Even things like Body of Lies and Thelma and Louise. There's this kind of a mystical edge that he just naturally, subconsciously brings. He trained as an art student and worked with Francis Bacon, and David Hockney was a fellow student of his. So he's an artist in many respects. That's why he's so
That makes an amazing amount of sense with the Francis Bacon influence, especially when you see certain threads of that even in Alien.
Absolutely, in Alien. And Alien's a fairy tale. It's Sleeping Beauty. It actually awakens to confront a monster. There's a whole mystical element to Alien. And I think it's very much there in Blade Runner. This kind of aura that surrounds the world he creates. It's not quite realism. It's kind of hyper-realism. It's a kind of poetic vision of the future. The thing I always laugh about, everyone describes it as a dystopia, but I think it's beautiful, Blade Runner. Yet it's meant to be this wrecked future where, it's all pollution has kind of riddled the city with acid rain. Yet somehow it just looks divine, and you kind of want to go there.
There's so much style and there's so much vibrancy to it. Even just looking at the set design and the neon lighting and how it's always slicked ground and smoke everywhere. I mean, it's visually compelling for sure.
Absolutely. To answer the question, come back to that. It's very spiritual and it's kind of religious. Batty wants to meet his maker. He wants to meet Tyrell. He wants to meet God. And he's complaining to God, why aren't you giving me more life? Why is I only get this amount of time? That's such a human cry. Why is this it? Why am I not more? And I think there's an element that Scott's only played on, that they're kind of fallen angels. That they look wonderful. They look more human than human. And I think Batty especially is kind of a Lucifer style figure in the kind of religious network of the film.
You've got Roy Batty, you've got Zora, you've got Leon, you've got Pris. They all are these almost in a way fish out of water sort of fallen angel type characters. Like when you look at it from that perspective, and they're after a physical manifestation of God. We can get down the rabbit hole with that, but it's an incredible perspective to look into for sure.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll come back to it because there are motifs in the film that are very temple-like, very Egyptian. There are kind of,
especially in the Bradbury building. Yeah. We'll talk about the architecture for sure.
And also with the different types of. I just want to say real quick, we can get through this later, but I'd love to discuss sort of the archetypes that the different replicants represent. And what you feel like is arbitrary and what do you think is absolutely intentional?
Well, yeah,
that'll be a great topic of discussion for sure.
Absolutely. Because obviously they are, on one level, they are replicants who are given functions and roles that have just been given to them. But they kind of, you're right, they have a kind of a greater element to this. That because the story is about them. Descartes is almost kind of he's almost the MacGuffin. It's almost like inverted. He drives the story along, but really it's about the replicants, and their quest. But in terms of the cut, I like the best. We were talking about this earlier, really. I don't see massive difference between the final cut and the director's cut, in the sense that I think the final cut is just the director's cut, spruced up, tidied up, made it look better. I know there's a kind of purist feeling about, don't go back and fix films too much because you lose some character in that.
Sure, sometimes the special editions do a little bit up against the original feel of the film, especially for certain fans. But yeah.
I do prefer Ridley's version, as it were, as opposed to the release version. I like the ending better. I don't really like the shining ending, the happy ending. Doesn't make much sense to me. But I know people who love the original cut and love the voiceover and thinks it gives it a kind of almost comic film noir-y feel to have that kind of sour Harrison Ford, I knew the lingo, all that stuff.
Yeah, and for a lot of people, it's the first version they saw, so they really have that connection with it.
Yeah, absolutely. But it just sort of takes away some of the mystery that, certainly in who he is, and certainly our judgment of us. And I think I love the way that without the kind of voiceover, the world is we kind of explore the world more. It's not presented to us. We have to kind of go into it a bit more and find it. But I do know there are those who love it.
I think it's also interesting, and we can talk about this more as well, but it created some context for people who had zero context walking into this, not knowing what was going on. And, the Warner Brothers brass really felt the need to sort of spoon feed what's going on. Otherwise, people will be completely lost. And I agree with that to a certain degree. I mean, it seems like how complicated can it be now? Because we know this film so well. But the first time you're exposed to this entire world, and it really was brand new in terms of the types of things being presented, I think it did help a little bit.
Yeah. Interestingly, here's a fact. Originally, the script had a voiceover in it, written by Hampton Fancham with Scott. His plan was to have a voiceover. And then they abandoned that quite late on, because they felt it was going too complicated and they felt it was taken away from it. And Scott was then getting very interested in pursuing the whole Deckard replicant enigma within it. So he had planned to have a voiceover at a certain point, and bits had been written, but he sort of ditched that, and then they sort of came back to it. And Scott accepted it. It's often written about and said that it was all enforced upon him, and he was trying to save the film as much as Warner Brothers were. I mean, he'd seen the test screening results, and they'd been awful. People didn't get it. And so he was panicking as well. And he's quite pragmatic in studio terms, Ridley Scott. I mean, on other films, like Kingdom of Heaven, he accepts there sometimes is compromise, but it wasn't the film he wanted to make. It's not his vision, but he accepted the voiceover had to come in.
And it's interesting. We'll certainly get to it about how, it can add or detract from the atmosphere. But talking a little bit about that, we have another question from the group. With the Blu-ray release, they cleaned up a lot of the image grain. Same thing with Aliens. So the picture is crystal clear. Do you think that took something away from the film, the atmosphere?
It's a great question. And it's quite a big question, because it's about this whole idea of what is the texture of movie, and should there be a graininess,
It's a function of HD, 1080p, 4K, cleaning it up as much as possible for that pristine presentation when you might be losing something of the original film element.
The warmth and sort of character that was in original celluloid. The experiments in, 24 frames per second and 60 frames per second, have all been failures, because we want some of that texture. I think it's kind of good and bad. I've looked at the Aliens quite recently again, and I love the detail in it. I was quite, seeing a new Blu-ray version, I was thinking, wow, there's things I hadn't noticed. And I do love that. And I love that, the details. And something like Blade Runner certainly gains in terms of the sharpness of the image and things you can see in the backdrop. Certainly some special effects get a little bit more obvious. When they're so
some mattes and some layering, and
but anyway, I don't mind that too much. But I also understand the argument that if you go down this road too far, you'll get to 24 frames per second. You'll get to that kind of clinical mirror, it looks like a Spanish soap opera kind of texture. That isn't film, It's funny. I went around. I toured many years ago. I toured around a place where they were kind of doing remastering old films, and they took us to the sound department, and they said we actually leave in a lot of crackles. This is about black and white films from sort of pre-war era, and they said we could take them all out and clean up the sound completely. But he says people don't want that. It spoils the old filmness of it, to not have that crackle, just a bit of that crackle in there.
The character of the movie.
Douglas Trumbull, who has spent his life trying to perfect the sort of the experience of being within the film itself with frame rates, he ultimately came to the conclusion that audiences prefer a disconnect to a certain degree, more of a voyeuristic feel as opposed to being in it with the characters themselves, especially when it comes to fantasy. It just is more effective in terms of the response.
No, that's interesting. I think that's true for me personally. It's like things like 3D take away from film for me. I'd love because I've got to use my imagination and then move into the film and experience the film. I don't need to be assisted with dimensions and all that kind of stuff. But same time, I'm sure if I went to see Blade Runner as it was presented in 1981. And sit in the cinema and think, what is this sound? Why is it so tinny in here? I'm sure it would be a different experience. I'm now used to THX and Dolby and all that, so we shouldn't be too grumbly about it. We have a good presentation these days.
Well, it's sort of like the revisit to vinyl. You're going to crisper and cleaner with digital sound. And inevitably, people miss the crackles and the imperfections because there's a certain nostalgic connection to it as well. Arguably, there's a whole generation that didn't have these, and so they don't understand why that is important. But I think we've just kind of explained it. You sort of create this slight disconnect of the technology versus the immersive experience, and sometimes you need that barrier.
Yeah.
Ian, we've got one more question that we'll take from the group, and this is a casting question before we do a little wrap up and have some final words and then play the In Search of Tomorrow trailer before we start the movie. This is from Sharon. Was the part of Roy Batty written specifically for Rutger Hauer? Was there anyone else considered for that part? Because that casting choice was spot on. And I have to agree, I couldn't see anybody else as Roy Batty other than the late, great Rutger Hauer.
Yeah, no, I don't know if it wasn't written for him in mind because they were doing casting across all the roles, and certainly with the replicants, they kind of opened it up. It's funny. There are lots of records about who could have been Deckard. Obviously Dustin Hoffman for a long while.
Yeah. Who they spent weeks with.
Yes, and you can see that what a different film that might have been. And now, there's all sorts of names, Jack Nicholson, all these names were thrown out there. Robert Mitchum at one point, that was Hampton Fancher's idea. He wanted Robert Mitchum. He really wanted it old school.
That's right. And he said he was still young enough and agile enough to pull it off.
Yeah. I'm not sure that's true. But,
well, according to Hampton Fancher, but...
I think with Batty, it was kind of very much a Ridley Scott choice with Rutger. He wanted... he wanted relative unknowns, so he could kind of, they could spring out at us almost. He didn't bring any preconditions to them. But something about he'd seen Soldiers of Color. He'd seen the Verhoeven movie and really liked it. And
the Turkish Delight as well.
Yeah, I think he was just swept away. He was such a personality, Rutger Hauer. He just came and told stories. He used to be a sailor. And he just told these kind of stories of having voyaged around the world. And I think Scott was just kind of smitten. But also, with Ridley, like all things, it's a look. He's got this eye, and he responds to his eye. That was there with Sigourney Weaver. That was there with Harrison Ford. And when he saw Rutger Hauer, and and that wonderful face of his, and that kind of sort of slightly subversive smile he has, as if he knows something more than you do. I think Scott was just smitten with a look. And then he said, no, we're going to bleach the hair and make him look even more like this kind of dandy figure that they create. But I don't actually know if he. I'm sure he did interview other people for the roles, but there's no great record of. Someone else may know, but of who else he might have been.
Do we have any other questions for Ian Nathan in the time that we've got left? If anyone has any questions
left before we're going to play the trailer, it looks like we've got a big discussion going on about Dustin Hoffman as Rick Deckard. So I think what we'll do is Ian will give you the floor for final comments before we start the movie. Is there anything you want to touch on before we watch the trailer for In Search of Tomorrow and then the film?
Well, just this really. Blade Runner it's a mystery story, and it's a film that is a mystery in and of itself. People say, what does it mean? I don't know. It can mean a million different things. Is Deckard a replicant? He may well be, but I don't know. And there's a great story, and I'll leave you this for now, is that, after all the turmoil of the shoots and the production, exhausting, all the special effects, Scott finally sat down in a cinema and watched the rough cut with Terry Rawlings, his editor. And they watched it through, and the sound kind of been great, but I think they had some Vangelis music on it already. He came out, he turned to Terry Rawlings and he said, I think it's marvelous what we've made. I think it's a marvelous film. He said, I haven't a clue what it's about.
Well, while we watch it, we'll explore different ideas. We'll see if we can piece anything together. Everybody listening in, thank you so much for joining us for the Q&A. This has been great. Thank you, Ian, for sitting down with us for a little bit before we start the movie. So everyone, we are going to go silent for a couple of minutes for the In Search of Tomorrow trailer. As soon as that's over, we'll do a quick countdown, and then we'll start the film. All right, everyone.
Yay.
So let's do a quick check. Ian, are you still with us?
I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Sure can. We are all set.
I can. Yes.
Okay, everybody. So everyone listening in, get your copies ready. Again, we are going to be on the title card where it says Gary Parencio and Bud Yorkin present. And in a few seconds, we will press play. Let's start that 5-second countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Play. It's the beginning of that great Vangelis music. Listen forward.
Either.
Thing I love about this score is that it works so well on its own. This is an album that I've listened to countless times just by itself from start to finish. It's incredibly good.
He was quite obsessive, Vangelis, once he was given the job, and he would actually synthesize the score, work out the score to the frame. You know, he was very scientific about it. He analyzed each beat of the frames, and then he added the music to it. Scott was quite in awe of how he worked. He had these kind of banks of synthesizers. This was the early 80s, in this kind of studio in Marble Arch in London. And he was this Greek man hidden in the middle of them all, just creating these kind of surreal sounds, the sounds of the future.
He was just surrounded by keyboards on every single side. I mean, looking at his studio setup, it was really like the cockpit of a spaceship just filled with musical instruments. And it's pretty amazing and impressive.
Yeah, it was. And it's kind of replicant music, it's synthesized music. It's not human music. That was kind of the idea, that it was not people playing violins. It was music that had this kind of synthetic quality, yet it was still beautiful and poetic.
What
kind of liquid-like quality?
What put him on Ridley Scott's radar? Do you recall?
Sorry, say that again.
Vangelis, what was it about his music? How did it get on Ridley's radar?
He'd been introduced. I think Michael Dealey knew of him, and he'd also worked in the kind of advertising industry at that time. Obviously, that Scott had come from in London. Let me just turn the sound down a little bit, and. So I think he'd been sort of moving in the advertising circles, and Dealey had kind of brought him to Scott's attention. Scott said he wanted something that was the future, that matched his images. He wanted sound and vision to be sort of joined at the hip, to be to one same thing.
There we go.
So, it's
vision of LA in 2019.
Absolutely.
Compared with the music, it's unbelievable.
Shot.
Yep. Yeah, we're going to interrupt here and there just to sort of
what is incredible about
Hades'
shot is that's 13 feet you're looking at there, from the front of the image to the back. And it's just
really, 13 feet wide.
That makes you think you're looking across this great gulf of Los Angeles. And if you think about it, and this is very important to Scott's decision to put this shot at the beginning, that's the only time in the film we see a wide, really, a huge, we see sort of flying spinner shots across top of buildings, but we don't see LA as a big wide shot apart from the very beginning. And it puts in our minds the idea that this is where it's going to take place. This is the environment of the film.
This first pyramid is one of the Tyrell Corporation pyramids, isn't it?
Very suggestive.
We're zooming in to see the interrogation.
Miniatures and effects. Douglas Trumbull, who had done Close Encounters 2001. Before this, he had directed Silent Running.
Yeah. He was
a motion picture.
Yeah. I mean, Scott had sought him out because of 2001, which was kind of like a sort of holy work for Scott. And he was going to turn it down, Douglas Trumbull. He was prepping a new film, Brainstorm. I think he was working on that.
Yes.
And it was the script that persuaded Trumbull to come on board. He was really interested in what the script proposed. Voight Kampf test.
It's Brian James.
There he is.
I love is this exchange, and it went through so many iterations, and how
it did. Yeah.
What we finally got was this sequence, but what they originally planned is what showed up in Blade Runner 2049, wasn't it?
Yes. Well, the famous opening sequence was, and it was all storyboarded, was that it was due to take place in the lonely farm, and Deckard would come out and find the farmer is a replicant and find his number on his jawbone. And that had all been storyboarded up, and it was kind of cut for cost reasons, I think. Plus, as you said, the script had been through so many iterations and so many different versions, and been quite a struggle to come to it. That in a way, this feels kind of better to me. That you want it to be in the city straight away. You want the whole film confined to the city, not to be anywhere else. So I'm kind of glad they didn't shoot that opening that comes with the sequel.
I've always loved the design of this machine and this process, the way it breathes. It's got sort of like a alt steampunk kind of. It sort of represents the sort of the breathing that is required to keep an even keel for this, and the audience and these two individuals sweating while they go through this really basic test. Really, sort of that hooked me right away.
Yes, it's kind of I think Scott wants you to feel like it would be slightly alive. Because, yes, you see this kind of piston, this kind of bag filling and being reduced. It's kind of a strange quality that it was kind of alive in its own right. And it could, oh, there we go.
Yep.
It always makes me laugh that, they're looking for an emotional response, and they get this really extreme emotional responses from these replicants. They're nothing but emotions.
Leon is the anger and the intensity. More than any of them, it seems like. Maybe Zora's a little match there too, but here's the let me tell you about my mother.
Sorry, let's get that finally done there. There we have the city street.
Iconic.
This image is just one of the most known images from this entire film. That huge geisha woman on the projection there.
It's a future
vision here is amazing.
Yeah. Scott had kind of he'd spent time in Hong Kong with his own company, his advertising company. He'd seen this whole idea of huge urban growth. He saw this as one of the warnings for the future, that Asia would come in and sort of take over. So he wanted to portray this idea of Asia, coming in, the influx, and this kind of the future world of America would become like a huge universe. The whole world was the same place. We don't really hear talk of the USA in the film. It's like there's only one country left, and it's just run by corporations. This was his idea of the future, and obviously that come from Dick as well. This kind of idea of a future patrolled by companies.
Also, they're selling the idea right away that you're either stuck here or you get to leave. There's access off-world. There's access on the moon. You could see it on his newspaper. There's other places to go, but the dregs of society pretty much have to remain on Earth. And this was sort of a relatively new idea introduced, where you have your hero sort of stuck with the rest of them, with the riffraff.
All the impression that I got too is that if you wanted to go off-world, you could go for labor work, or if you could qualify. But if you weren't able to, you were stuck here on Earth in this environment. Whether you call it dystopian or not.
Yeah. It kind of puzzled me, really, and it's kind of one of the mysteries of the film is that it's mainly full of the working class, this city, but also it has Tyrell, and it has this kind of almost ultra rich who is still on Earth. So I kind of want the way it's only the middle classes who've gone off with the world. Who has gone elsewhere? Why is it that Tyrell wants to stay with his industry here? Why isn't he off-world? Maybe I'm thinking too hard about it, but it's kind of a weird.
This is one of those movies that opens up for intense
allergies.
Focus, and
it's all about the allergies.
Let's give a huge shout out real quick to Edward James Olmos as Gaff. He's just amazing in his role, and his city speak he took from Hungarian influences and a ton of other things. I love the inside joke of what he had just said Deckard earlier, calling him some pretty vulgar stuff while he's sitting there having noodles.
And let's take a moment to shout out to Sid Mead for his futurist design.
Oh yeah,
I've always been the Spinner has been my all-time favorite great vehicles in sci-fi. Just the design, the interaction that you have to fly it, the windows on the floor. It's just amazing. Even the design of the Spinner logo on the side of the craft itself, that clearly looks like it's a brand.
Okay, there we have.
If you look hard enough, you can see the Millennium Falcon, I think.
Yes. This is
there,
Grand
actually.
Union. Yeah.
Where is it?
This is Grand Union Station, where they did the police precinct. This is one of 3, I think, actual Bradbury Building, Grand Union Station, and the tunnel. Are the 3 actual LA locations in the film, whereas the rest of it's all Warner Brothers backlot.
Yep, and they're all pretty close together in downtown Los Angeles. I've had the privilege of living here, so you can go here. And
So you know them well.
Yeah, I've been to the Bradbury Building many times. I've been to Union Station, and it's very cool and fun. I've been to parties at Union Station.
His role in this is so great.
I love Emmett Walsh. He's a mad man. I've interviewed him a couple of times, and he's a mad guy, but he's just great. For his work in the Coen Brothers films and
absolutely.
This. But he's
Simple and so many more.
I just love the idea in this scene. This is a real kind of callback scene. Scott said, he wanted the film set 40 years into the future and 40 years in the past. And this is a real kind of old school film noir scene. The cop goes in to see his chief. He has to be dragged out of retirement. They're drinking whiskey. It's fans. The whole texture of it. Lawrence G. Paul, the designer. It's pure film noir. It's old looking. And that's such a kind of a weird concept for sci-fi to embrace. The idea that the texture would be broken up, worn out, battered.
Again, I think that's a huge attribute for Philip K. Dick, who just wrote so many stories where the future was lived in. It wasn't this pristine vision of hallways and incredible technology. It was basically we're all just putting together what we can and trying to make do with what we've got.
I don't understand why. Here we have our first showing of Origami. Edward A. Moses. I don't understand why lampshades with shots of hunters and their prey have not caught on more widely ever since.
And here you have the look, in terms of Scott's lighting. It is phenomenal. Even today, he thinks it's made in 1980-81. Just visually, it's still a staggering film in terms of, that's a scene entirely made of kind of a silver blue light. And it was a source of so many of the struggles on the film, is that Scott could see this look in his head. He knew what the film would look like before he started, and was absolutely determined it would be that film, but had great trouble explaining that to his crew and to his cast. They couldn't get what he was getting at.
He was quite the pioneer in keeping a static shot with activity in the frame that isn't just the actors. So he's constantly populating it with strobe lights or smoke, or you look at Legend, there's pollen flying throughout all the scenes. It's quite amazing how he keeps everything active while you're focused on the story. It keeps you from falling asleep. It makes you pay attention.
These days, his production department, they bring barrels of sort of dust and feathers and all sorts. They just bring it to the set. Remember what they're shooting with Ridley. Because they'll say, I need some stuff in the air, and they need to be ready. So they'll set up a shot, and then they'll give it to him, and he'll just get these kind of handfuls of dust and just throw it in front of the camera into the lights. As you say, he just loves that texture, because it gives depth to the shot and kind of a feeling of movement.
Of all the behind the scenes footage of him just going through and having his crew just barrel smoke into the frames. And he said his 3 components were for this: rain, darkness, and smoke. But another thing I want to mention too is the incredible work of DP cinematographer Jordan Cronenwith, because he went through unbelievable struggle during this. And I believe, didn't he also wind up with Parkinson's?
He did.
That had set on, and he wound up in a wheelchair by the end of the film while he was shooting this?
He was in the wheelchair on the film towards the end, and he found he was ill. And, you know, it must have been very difficult for him because Scott had come from advertising, and Scott wanted to hold the camera. He wanted to do the shooting himself. You know, I think in his head, really, I'm not sure he wanted to even have a camera department. He thought he could do it, and that's how he likes to work. So that was, but he had to because it was American Union rules, and I think poor old Jordan Cronenweth really got the extent of Scott's furies in that respect. But yeah, absolutely, you know, he responded to that by creating one of the most visually inspiring films ever made. So
if you look at the halo of the lighting, it's very reminiscent of that shot in Close Encounters. There's a very similar feel to it, and of course you got Douglas Trumbull doing both of those.
Again, like you were saying, Ian, you know, everything's dirty, but it's really beautiful.
Yes, it's stunning. And interestingly, with the model work, which is all done afterwards, they were doing a lot of shots, but it wasn't until Scott joined them that the smoke was properly added. And again, it had to be exactly the right consistency to create the idea of depth and scope. So they had to sort of jerry-rig this unit made out of an air conditioning and a smoke detector. And literally, the smoke detector would mark the level of smoke in the set and then would switch on a fan. So if it got too dense, it would blow it crazy. They had to kind of jerry-rig it all and build these things themselves because Scott had an absolute precise version of the smoke that he needed.
I remember reading that one of the Tyrell pyramids actually caught fire at the end of the shoot. Now we have the artificial owl and our introduction of Rachel.
If you actually look at the back of the shot here, there's the pillars. You've got these wonderful kind of Egyptian-looking pillars on either side of the frame.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And on it's one of the first shots they did. I think it's one of the early shots in the sequence. And they went in and they built them the wrong way up. So all that design work was up at the top of the frame out of the shot. And they'd spent 2 weeks building this set. And Scott came in and just looked, went, the pillars are upside down, change them, and walked back out again. And they had this incredible floor, if you see it there, so shiny. And they thought, we're going to scratch the floor. So it took them another week to take these pillars down and switch them around. And that's how it starts as you mean to go on, really. And Scott's right. You've got to have that shape in the frame.
So everybody listening in, this is a great time to mention that in Search of Tomorrow, we have Sean Young cast to be talking about this and other films. David, do you want to discuss anything about Sean Young's interview or what
Absolutely. Well, I had a chance to sit down with her right before we were not allowed to sit down with people for a spell. And she talked about all sorts of things about Blade Runner, including returning to the role of Rachel, which was quite interesting because when she came to 2049, she actually went to the set, but they didn't quite use her. It was more sort of a publicity stunt to have her go over there, but they really didn't use her very much. But it was quite an experience for her to go back. And she had all sorts of wonderful tales about working on Blade Runner. And as Sean Young is known to be, she was very candid. She did not pull punches about her coworkers and the environment and what she expected versus how she was put to work. And I'll leave it at that.
It was a tough shoot for everybody, I think. Scott, couldn't explain himself, enough, I think, for them to catch on. And Ford, as we know, had a difficult time trying to understand where he was coming from and would spend hours just waiting for these incredible shots to be set up. And Sean Young was very young. And I think she struggled. Certainly she struggled with Harrison Ford to get on. But it's one of those things where I think the tensions somehow seep into the film to its benefit. That, it's got this kind of taut edge to it, Blade Runner.
It certainly adds to the tone.
Yeah.
A beneficial way. I mean, even though there's, struggle behind the art, it's still there.
Absolutely. It's kind of like Apocalypse Now, the craziness of the making of that film is imbued in the craziness of the film you watch.
Again, which Harrison was on.
He was. Yes.
It's all his fault.
Yeah. You get a much easier time on Apocalypse Now, but...
Yeah, up until this point, he had worked with Coppola, he'd worked with Lucas, he'd worked with Spielberg, and then Ridley Scott comes to him with this, and it's a completely different thing.
It's interesting. Obviously, we talked earlier about Dustin Hoffman had been cast, and they were going with quite an intellectual version of Deckard.
Right.
And he was going to wear a beanie hat, and there's storyboards with him. But Dustin Hoffman was just at that height of his method kind of intensity and kept sort of not committing, going, what is it all about? What does it mean, Ridley? And they realized they hadn't really got him. And it was Barbara Hershey, who was up for the role of Rachel, who knew Harrison Ford, knew Spielberg, and they were shooting Raiders of the Lost Ark in London. And she said, you've got to see this guy Harrison Ford to Hampton Fancher, who was then her boyfriend. And so it was through her and through Hampton Fancher they found out about Ford, and they went over and Spielberg showed them footage of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And Scott was very impressed, but he was, he wasn't sure. And then Ford comes out to meet them, and the first thing, he's still wearing his Indiana Jones hat. And Scott is just crestfallen, because that is exactly the look he wanted for Deckard, the classic hat. And I think, but he obviously was very impressed with the footage. He was very impressed with Ford, and he did get cast. But the haircut you can see on the screen there, a lot of it, I think that comes from, not having the hat. And they wanted a kind of look for him that was different. That wasn't Han Solo. That was, presented a very different kind of character.
Well, that was for me. Go ahead, please.
Well, I say it was Ford who came up with the haircut.
Yeah, well, that cut to me was my first sort of weird appreciation of this movie, because I did not like that haircut whatsoever, because it wasn't Han Solo, it wasn't Indiana Jones, but it was different, and it was clearly an effort of Harrison Ford to be a different character, and that was that telegraphed to me that this was going to be different, and that we shouldn't expect that same type of character. I wanted to add also, I interviewed Ridley for the 40th anniversary of Alien.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really struck me during our conversation was the fact that he really enjoys the casting process, because what his main goal is, other than populating it with the ideal characters and archetypes, is he ultimately wants to not have to deal with actors and acting. He wants to put them in the frame and let them do their thing, so he could focus on every other specific detail, everything from the storytelling to the mise en scène to everything around his entire sort of camera movements and the atmosphere. So when all of a sudden actors get needy and say, tell me more about this, how do I get this done? He gets agitated. He doesn't like doing that. And he clashed with the actors on Alien until they began to realize his process. Yeah. And it was a similar experience, but I don't think as greatly so on this.
Can you imagine if he'd had Dustin Hoffman? Dustin,
especially hot off of Midnight Cowboy and what Dustin Hoffman had been doing in the late 70s for sure. It would have been very interesting.
They never have got a film made if Dustin Hoffman had been sort of at it.
What do you think, Ian, about the sequence here? This is kind of our first, I wouldn't say really a lull in the pacing of the movie, but we have kind of a important focus on the search for the replicants and going into Leon's hotel room and finding the pictures, and then the scale as well. What does this kind of do for the narrative so far that we're in?
Sequence, I think, where you see Deckard be a detective, where he actually fulfills his role and his archetype as the private eye, the Bogart figure.
Because Harrison Ford had said, I'm a detective who does no detecting, but here we have it.
He does actually quite a lot. It's one of those complaints raised, not least by Harrison Ford, that, we never see him do his job. But this whole sequence, shows he's a very good detective, and just shows something of that kind of intensity, that he's an internal man, he's a brooding man. Plus, you have the subtext given to us here by James Olmos and Gaff that he might be starting to fall for Rachel. But again, and also it's about the look of the rooms and that old schoolness, the antique feel that Blade Runner has. That it's more noir than noir. These kind of scenes.
Also, the effect of the music that's included.
Yeah.
I think it's Desert Rose by Vangelis. Right before we really cut straight into this image of Roy clenching his fist and the full profile of Rutger Hauer here.
Yeah.
Which is
That was
just
amazing.
the best. His intro in this movie is perfect.
It's fantastic. And that city block was so versatile because it's just one city block that they shot on. And they just sort of shot it from different angles and different sort of places. They made it seem a lot more of Los Angeles than they actually built.
And of course, choosing to have it take place at night when you're shooting those images, you get a lot more play out of it because you don't have that depth that you would normally have to hide otherwise.
I didn't know it was only one single block just because of how well it's all done. It makes it seem like they're in different parts of the city throughout the film.
Yeah, it's incredibly well managed, that whole side. And it's the Warner Brothers backlot, the New York set. They just sort of stuck bits of the future onto this old set. And that was perfect.
Also, too, the extras and the way that Ridley's using them. I mean, it seems like there's so much life going on, even in the middle of the night version of LA.
Yeah. Great sort of scurrying in the background, this idea of kind of a nightlife, even though it's permanently night. And just that's an astonishing image, isn't it? The cyclist.
Time to go eye shopping. Just
James Hong, Hannibal Chow.
Yes, exactly.
He's amazing in this. And they almost froze to death while shooting this too.
Yes. It was as cold as it looks.
It's too funny hearing that the cameras would actually freeze up and the oil inside of the cameras would just stop if the production had gone longer than 30 minutes and they didn't take a break.
And of course, I'll state the obvious. James Hong is one of those amazing character actors who's been in so many things, but a lot of this audience knows him as David Lo Pan in Big Trouble in Little China, which really kind of made him a star to the genre department.
Absolutely.
And again, it's the extra degree of visual elements, isn't it? That Scott brings to it. The
little icicles that are hanging down from the ceiling, and
you get it. It's kind of absurd as well, though, isn't it? It's the fairy tale element of the whole film. Is that why isn't all this in the Tyrell building? Why isn't all his sort of different laboratories and designers? Why are they not housed under one roof? Why do they work in these strange little kind of freelance pockets across LA? I mean, I don't need to know why, but it works. But it's a mystery to me why the Tyrell operates as he does.
Almost a sense of a little bit of adventure where you have to go from these different locations to the next while trying to put all the pieces together for the overall story. But I also just love how Brian James reaches into the frozen eyes and then pulls out the muck and looks at his hand, which we kind of get mirrored a little bit later with the hard-boiled eggs.
This also is a wonderful introduction to Roy Batty, where he's really charismatic. He's friendly. He's approachable, but he can turn on a dime. But he doesn't have to demonstrate his power because he's got Brian James to sort of be the muscle. So all he has to do is ask for what he wants, and he doesn't have to show any strength or intimidation.
He gets to be the negotiator, and got Leon being the henchman off to the side, and it's a great dynamic as it progresses until we get the real first confrontation.
I love how he talks throughout Batty and how his delivery. He is a poet from the beginning of the film. Everything is eloquent and expressed. He's finely tuned. He's cultured. He's a sort of gentleman dandy who's also a psychopath.
Let's talk about the characters of each of the replicants. They're all very singular. And we were kind of talking about that earlier, how, you know, each one of them have their own characteristics. Do you want to kind of elaborate on Roy and then sort of go down the list?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, they could, I suppose, have just made them the same. And I think it's a lot of credit to Fancher, really. I think extrapolating from Dick, that they have very vivid different characters. And my reading of the film is always that, you know, the most exciting and developed and rich and funny and strange characters in the film are the replicants, are the non-human ones. You know, that's the kind of irony of it all. So you have, obviously, their leader, Roy Batty, who is, you know, he's something of a warrior, but he's not a thug like Leon. Leon clearly is just the muscle, you know, who has a kind of mother issue we learned earlier.
I'll tell you about my mother, which is a recurring thing through different Ridley Scott films.
Very often shot tunnel. I've shot in this tunnel, and this appears in so many films.
Yeah.
Yes.
Perhaps most memorably in Blade Runner.
It looks fantastic here with how everything's just glistening from every angle.
THX 1138.
Yeah, they shot there as well, isn't it?
Everything. So many things.
It's one of the few places I think that Ridley didn't have to dress too much. He just had to shine a great light on it, and you just got the effect you wanted from it. So here we have the great Sid Mead work.
Yes, which Sid Mead had developed a huge set that was never used. It was kind of like Deckard's lounge bed.
Yeah,
that would split up into all these different segments, but still, again, everything that makes it on screen is just amazing.
Also, the building we're looking at right now is it's drawing on Frank Lloyd Wright.
Yes, right. Design. This is the Frank Lloyd Wright house that has been in a ton of other movies, hasn't it? Even going back to House on Haunted Hill, I think.
Yeah.
Others? Yeah.
Although,
it's amazing just how it looks.
They only used pieces of it. The rest is a set.
I think the idea was, you know, again, the motif is Egyptian. You know, and you were talking earlier a little bit about spiritual elements in it and kind of religious overtones, but all of the
music influence and different things. Yeah. Sure.
You know, Tyrell's room has a kind of Egyptian look. His, you know, Deckard's apartment has a sort of strangely sort of temple-like, you know, feel to it.
And the obvious take on that, as you both know, is that you know, the Egyptian concept is all about attaining a continued life in the afterlife.
Yeah.
You know, it's life after life, life after death. You know, so, and that's what all these characters are seeking. They're seeking their extension.
I'm surprised there aren't more cats in this movie. You know, actually, that's the thing too. Yeah, the influence of Philip K. Dick on this, a huge element of the book is that so much of the life on Earth has died out, which is the significance of the artificial owl when we first meet Rachel in Tyrell's building. But that's something I think there was also replicant dog, a snake. The snake we'll get there.
With,
Also, if I could just jump in during this scene, and maybe you could tell me where this is, Ian, but there's discussion where if any character is a replicant, there's a moment in the movie where at least a number of times, or at least once, there's the reflection, like the cat eye reflection in the eyes.
It's the orange corona,
Yeah, but during this particular scene, there is a moment where you either just saw or will see in Harrison Ford. You catch a moment.
Yes. We haven't yet. I mean, you can see a hint of it there in Sean. You see it early on with her when she's still with Tyrell. And obviously you see it in the owl's eyes very clearly. But we do catch a glimpse. We're going to have to look out for it now, aren't we? In Ford's eyes. Again, it's one of the sequences or one of the elements that Scott said was always there and always pointed to the fact he is in fact a replicant. He just doesn't know it.
I think Harrison's very adamant against.
To this day, he you know, even on the set of 2049, he was insistent he was still a human being. You know, and we can argue because 2049 doesn't answer the query either. You know,
which I really admired, and I was glad. I like keeping it a big question mark, and I think sometimes you don't need to have these answered. even though Ridley is determined
Yes,
to just
Ridley
say, he's
says
a
there's no more
replicant,
argument.
okay? He's a replicant.
Move on, people. That's what the tinfoil means. That's what the unicorn means.
Take off your tinfoil hat.
I like the enigma, but I also like this idea that set a thief to catch a thief. The perfect person to catch a replicant is a replicant, and it's the kind of existential dilemma. It's the idea that how do we know we're human?
One thing about that too is I think there's an interesting shift in the way that Deckard is treated later on in the film by Bryant. Emmett Walsh kind of flips on him from earlier when he's saying, I need that old Blade Runner magic. And then later on, we're going to see it, kind of be a different dynamic. But job's done.
Just had a moment. I just wanted to sort of interject. I apologize. Where they showed Harrison Ford in a very stark chiaroscuro black and white shadow right in the middle of his face, and that's a age-old filmmaker trick, like looking in the mirror for an extended period of time or multiple mirrors, where you are showing the multitude of personality, and this one's showing the duality of Harrison Ford's personality. It's also indicating or implying that he could be a replicant. So it's all how you want to perceive it.
Yes.
I think it's going to be interesting when we get to the end of the film and we kind of talk about how this version sort of makes a kind of decision, it being Ridley Scott's, definitive director's cut. But we've been, during this whole conversation, getting a ton of comment from the group talking about this version specifically and compared to the other versions, whether he's human or not. Here we now have Pris entering the film, which I always thought it was interesting in the reveal of the characters and the briefing that Deckard gets. Aren't the characteristics of Pris and Zora kind of flipped?
Well, if I could jump in real quick before you answer this, please. Ian, I wanted to point out earlier, I love how she's military/leisure, which is a deadly combination.
Yes, and she proves it later on too. What's interesting, Daryl Hannah got the job because she came into the audition looking like that, and she'd modelled her look on Klaus Kinski.
Nosferatu,
Nosferatu. She just sort of thought, well, I'll go as a vampire. And she did pale skin and this kind of mad hair. And of course, Scott loved it. He got it straight away and go, don't change a thing. He wanted this kind of weird kind of New York punk look she almost has. She's kind of beautiful, but yet you think, how are you exactly an ideal? You're kind of a bit messed up. But again, we're talking about the kind of the idea of the archetypes the replicants fulfill. And Pris is kind of interesting, because, inevitably in the idea of a replicant future, they would be prostitutes. That would be the service. And this is kind of echoed into the sequel. There's a whole element of that in which you see prostitute replicants. Yet she's not entirely that. As you put it, she's military and dangerous and different.
The Kick Murder Squad, I think.
And she's a deceiver. And she's sort of central. Look at it. She's a trickster, like they all were. But she's also having a relationship with Batty, which is sort of proof that replicants can, have emotional bonds with one another.
Another great character in this film, here we have J.F. Sebastian, played by the amazing William Sanderson, and kind of what her mission or goal is to, just like you're saying, deceive him, get to Tyrell. Yeah.
If you kind of see here on the background, you'll see there's a cinema hoarding, the $1 Million. It's the $1 Million Hotel. Anybody knows Wim Wenders films or U2 videos? They know the downtown reference to $1 Million Hotel. It's where the streets have no name. U2 video. It's the building they sing on the top of. But obviously,
I think it's also Wings of Desire.
Wings of Desire.
Heavily on that,
yeah.
Carla brings to attention, and I'll just reiterate it here. I just love the fact that when Daryl Hannah was trying to make her sort of run away, and she smashed into the truck and broke the window, that was not planned, and she did injure herself, and it's a great little moment.
She said she still has a scar for that, just that little nick on her arm there. Also, one thing that's really interesting was the original casting of Pris. Before Daryl Hannah was completely locked in, like Carla said, Blondie was up for it, but it was also Stacey Nelkin who had done a ton of the screen tests. And personally, I know her best from Halloween 3, but the whole reason that they decided to go with Daryl Hannah was because of her frame, and especially the fact that Stacey Nelkin didn't seem like she'd be able to overpower Deckard later on when they have that conflict in Sebastian's apartment.
Here we have the beautiful, beautiful Bradbury building lit.
It's amazing.
This has been in a multitude of films. They probably spent the most time in the movie Wolf with Jack Nicholson, where you get to really see the building very well. But you could, anyone could just walk into this building in downtown Los Angeles, and it's worth the effort because it's a lot
nicer than it appears here.
Yeah, exactly. It's drier, too.
Flooded and littered.
But yeah, those elevators, they all work. It's really a stunning work of art.
I love the idea of the floodlights. You know, it's like, are there floodlights? What are they doing? You know, I don't think it matters. It's one of those Scott things. He just wants moving light in the back of the frame.
I always felt like they were motivated by the off-world blimps that go overhead.
Yeah, the blimp.
It's like, I was going to say, the spotlights from the blimp. Yeah.
But it sort of never goes away. It doesn't pass over, does it? He just keeps it in the frame.
Home again, jiggity jig. Some of J.F. Sebastian's Android creations here.
Yeah. Here for me, the whole of his apartment is what I think the sequel never captures, is this kind of theatricality of the look. This is almost Dickens and Miss Havisham and, you know, it's City Bang Bang and the Toy Maker. It's a very different
stage-like set too.
Yeah. You know, it's got that kind of romantic edge that Scott brings to it. That it's an unreal world. It's an unreal future. It's something of a fantasy almost, you know. That
it leads to one of my favorite images later on too, where Daryl Hannah's got a see-through cloth over her face, but we'll get to that.
Mm-hmm.
Or back to Deckard's apartment.
Creepy mind look.
This is a big part of the final cut, isn't it? We've got coming up, one of the visions of the unicorn.
And I love how you have these family photos here for Deckard, but you can't help but think that when you learn that photos are just a prop, you know, that obviously that ties into his whole replicant element too. Now, of course, Ian, you can talk all about how this was not in the original cut, but we have now a unicorn coming through the shot. What's up with that?
The tie-in to Legend, I think.
Well, yeah, the early promo for Legend is unbelievable. And it's not an outtake from Legend, as also it was reputed to be. It was shot particularly for Blade Runner and was always in the Hampton Fancher's script. And is one of Scott's great arguments for the fact that Ford should have known full well that he was a replicant. But the idea is, again, it's about implanted memories and implanted dreams. And of course, it's the foreshadowing of Gaff's final little gift at the end of the film that should, as far as Scott is concerned, seal the deal on the fact that, you know, Deckard has had his memories implanted and he's clearly a replicant.
Which leads to the thought that Gaff knows the entire time. The beginning of the film, Gaff is completely aware that Deckard is a replicant doing his job.
In fact, you wonder whether Gaff's sort of the guy who sort of programmed him or sent him on his way. You know, I start to wonder, it's like, well, how old is Deckard then? You know, when did they create him?
Mm-hmm.
You know, is he been doing this for a while, or has he literally been created for this one job? You know, has he come off the production line recently? You know,
he could have walked right out of the Tyrell building and gone straight to get some noodles. After reading the paper.
What? This technology always struck me in this particular scene as very prescient, because we essentially have this right now in a different sort of roundabout way of expanding photos and higher density photos, and that you can actually look at very, very, very specific details in high resolution. And at this point, you could practically talk to your computer to have it done, which is super cool. But I always love, next to this high-tech device, you still have a coffee cup filled with pens and pencils.
It's great. A pragmatic edge to it. And it's sort of thematically, it's the idea of, pictures betray them, photographs, and memories are things that reveal them and betray them. And it's sort of the pictures here, which are used by the replicants as some kind of humanizing device for them, betray them. It's where Deckard hones in on his quarry, proving he is a good detective.
Also, I was going to throw in this mirror moment just real quick. I wanted to interject that it's kind of a bit of an M.C. Escher moment in terms of the reflection and the details in the reflection that you study and you discover more. And a lot of Ridley Scott is a huge appreciation. He's an art student, and so he's studied the masters and he knows.
There's actual painting. There's the marriage of, I'm going to get my reference wrong now. Maybe someone can fix me on this. Marriage of Utino or something. It's a very famous painting of a married couple, which there's the mirror, circular mirror between them, in which you can see the reflection of the artist. And it's that idea that you can see beyond the frame of the painting into something else, and it's there. And of course, Scott was drawing on classical art, as he does in all his films.
Joanna got the reveal that she has the snake tattoo, which I always thought was interesting. Yes, Joanna Cassidy is amazing in this, but there's a reveal later on where it sort of shines through her skin. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Never really quite understood that concept, how it's practically invisible and then it shows up after what happens to her.
They have the great neon.
More shots of the great cityscape.
Yeah. Better than traffic jam. Brilliant. Traffic's not moving. Everyone's there.
Artificial animals.
Yeah.
I think another element, one of the wonderful world-building elements of this movie is the fact that animals have to be recreated and are actively recreated, which sort of takes on the whole pollution and dystopian theme that we've sort of done in everything, and that if you want animal companionship, you have to buy it in a very, very high-tech replica.
Well, it's where the original title comes from. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? The idea that the original Deckard dreams of having animals. It's because they're worth so much money. In this kind of mad future. I always have the idea that at the end when we get the dove, released by Roy Batty, and I was thinking, is that a replicant dove? Has he found one? Is it luckily,
That's in his satchel the whole time.
Yeah.
To jump back to what you were talking about earlier, Ian, I think it's the Colonel Feeney portrait is the
thank you very much. For
this upcoming moment to me is it's a real treat whenever Harrison Ford within a film, usually when he's so monotone, he takes on sort of another character that he sort of has to ingratiate himself in a situation. He did that in Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade.
We used to have collect these in the Empire Office, goofy Harrison Ford moments.
Yes.
There aren't very many.
And it makes you realize that he's actually
Zora.
It's like his monotone acting is a choice because there's so much capability underneath that he gets to shine every couple movies.
I wanted to get your impression, Ian, of what you think of this as an adaptation of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. It's such an interesting story, and it follows the process of encounters with different replicants, androids as it goes along, but on its own, it seems like this is, influenced, but still an amazing piece completely by itself.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who's read the novella, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, will know how very different the stories are.
Incredibly.
And Scott always said the book just presents 50 different plot lines at you all at the same time, all these different things going on. Philip K. Dick, his mind flew in different directions, electrifying, but for a film, very difficult.
Issues of politics, economics, drug use. And here we have the shot of the two masked dancers.
That's right.
It was a huge moment for everyone who was waiting for the final cut, that was finally going to be included again.
Finally, it was there. Didn't really change the narrative greatly, but it was certainly
those two masked
little character
dancers
to
are the ones
the club.
They escaped Carousel from Logan's Run, and they kept their masks.
But anyway, just on the adaptation front, it was Scott who said, in the end, it needs to be the romance. Him and Fancher had these long discussions, and he said it's a detective who falls for his quarry, who falls for Rachel. And he said that he saw the film fundamentally as a love story. And that's how they should focus it. So it's kind of interesting, he doesn't view it ultimately as the chase thriller or the detective story or the existential thing, but they're all there. He said it's a love story. It's fundamentally about Deckard falling for Rachel.
I always enjoy this character who's here at the bar with Deckard.
Mm-hmm.
He feels like he should be out of Casablanca, which I think is deliberate. He's a kind of, he's one of those kind of wheeler dealers who wanders into Casablanca, into Rick's bar. And I think that's kind of true. It's something that Sean Young says, that she said she thought they were making the sci-fi Casablanca.
I can't wait until we all mix and mingle so closely together again with reckless abandon. It'll happen soon.
I know. It's like, what are they doing?
Once we have towering pyramids throughout the entire city and giant fireballs going up every few seconds, I'm sure we'll be happy to join up again.
Now, of course, he's making his phone call, and it's 555, which will take you out of any movie if you live in movie land, and every phone. Yeah, I'm always impressed when someone dials a number and it's not 555.
One thing I've always thought about here was, how drunk does Deckard really get?
He drinks
so
a lot.
It seems like he does get a few in before he has that confrontation with Zora.
Another
and this call here is uncomfortable.
Love about this moment is the graffiti on the video phone. Because
fantastic.
We all have these visions that the future is clean and perfect. And the fact that this is just so commonplace that people could care less and they'll graffiti on it as well. It doesn't matter. And that is a wonderful sort of character detail of the overall design of this place and this world.
I wonder how much John Carpenter's Escape from New York influenced it. I watched that again quite recently. And I thought, Carpenter, was making a film at a similar time, was really onto something with that look. And that whole idea of the grungy 80s New York, that, or the grungy 70s New York, that probably him and Scott were drawing upon.
Well, that was also very real and present. If you grew up in New York City in the 70s, before it was really kind of cleaned up, it was grungy, it was gritty, it was dingy. And actually, Joker really capitalized on that by turning Gotham City into pretty much 70s New York, complete with garbage men on strike and piling up, piles of garbage on the sidewalks because no one wants to care enough to clean it up. And so that was very real at the time, and so it was a potent image. Here's our
that nasally voice.
Yes.
Joanna Cassidy just covered from head to toe and all of this. Yeah.
Joanne Cassidy, who and Ridley Scott were an item. Thanks to this film.
It really connected over her character. There was a whole sense of her strength and her power, and how she was able to be just as strong a fighter as anybody else on the team was a major point that she loved. And she also, as soon as she got the script, said, I want to be the one with the snake.
It was very
apparently, had a great time acting with the, is it a python that's there with her? Or?
It's a constrictor of some sort, isn't it?
Yeah.
Someone will have to kind of email us in.
She just asked him if he's for real. I'm gonna harp on every moment that
every little hint.
I don't want him to.
Seems like a little throwaway, but not.
Yep, every moment.
He does come across sleazy, doesn't he? He's great in this sequence forward. What a sleaze
Seems very skeevy, very Now he's doing a little bit more detective work, while whenever he needs to talk, he'll put on that voice again. Again, talking about it being kind of a dirty, really lived in vision of the future. I think it also goes a little bit back to maybe Tarkovsky and Solaris and some of his visions, how he seemed to reject just exactly what all of 2001 was about.
Why do we not all have these blow dryers now? I don't understand.
The hair gets so big and 80s straight away, doesn't it? She comes out of it. It's
Exactly.
Like this perfect hairdo. Yeah. I only connected recently. I saw Who Framed Roger Rabbit again. That Joanne Cassidy is the female lead in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Obviously,
that's right.
Jessica Rabbit.
Hoskins' girlfriend. Yeah.
Yeah.
The owner of the bar.
I know her, and it just dawned on me about halfway through. My God, it's Joanne Cassidy.
We also had Carla in the group mention that she was in Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead, but she's done a ton of great stuff across the years, and this, for me, absolutely is one of her best.
Yeah, everyone will remember Zora. And of course, she's a woman, a female replicant that he shoots in the back. He's not a noble figure, Deckard. The things she does. He's not a
Harrison Ford plays pain really well. By the way, this image right here is like the ultimate cyberpunk image of fashion, where you have this slick see-through raincoat. Yeah, it's set quite a standard.
We've been having members of the group talking about the cyberpunk imagery of this film and just how it's so definitive of the subgenre for sure. But yeah, Ian, just like you were talking about, he's going through all of the crowded streets, ready to shoot her as soon as he can spot her. Complete disregard of everything
bring
else.
Her in alive. It's just he's an assassin more than a detective. He's just got to kill him. Although we have the two
out. Yeah,
a lot of the great look of it, certainly on street level, comes from Mobius, the French comic book artist who Scott got to know while he shot Alien. He'd been introduced to Scott then, and he came on and did the costumes for Alien. And Scott was a huge fan. Loved the worlds he created.
Both of them were involved in Dune at one point.
They were going to do that from a lot of the Giga sketches left over from the Jodorowsky version.
Right.
There's a lot of kind of a through line from those things. And it was the death of Scott's brother, his older brother, Frank, at the time, that left him a bit bereft. And actually, it was before Blade Runner. And he was going to take years off, to kind of get over it. And he couldn't. He was too restless. He needed to work. And that's when he came back to the script for Blade Runner. And there's something about Blade Runner that kind of spoke to him about death and life. And
he had rejected it a couple of times.
Yeah, he didn't want to do sci-fi. He wanted to move on. But it was a film that communicated with his grief for the loss of his older brother, because it's about life and death. And it's kind of funny. I think there's a lot of that in it, on a certain level, that it's a film, about Scott's kind of exercising his own ghosts.
So what we're about to get is one of the major changes for the final cut.
The reshot.
Talk a little bit about how this all played out and it really needed to be retooled in Scott's eyes.
It was kind of the shot that she crashes through the glass and it's coming up in a few beats. If you watch
the first shots fired.
Yeah, the original versions. It's a hurried shot, I think, from the original set, and you can see it's the stunt woman. So they went back and they reshot with Joanne Cassidy and then digitally de-aged her. You might be able to correct me here. So here's the shot. She crashes through the grass. Again, that's the shot there. In the original, you could see it wasn't quite her.
Right. I think one of those woman had a wig that was starting to be a little bit too different from.
Is there any more plate glass that you could run through? Because we've gone through.
What is this?
She's just running through the whole mall, isn't she? So
she's just crashing through it all.
It's kind of like Police Academy with Thornburg. After he gets shot, he still burns himself. He keeps on tripping.
I think we're the very first film commentary that's ever compared Blade Runner to Police Academy. So great first.
There you have
the Police Academy, Police Squad, Naked Gun.
Right.
Right there behind her, you have the perfect encapsulation of the Scott moment. Not only did she crash through grass, but she crashes through glass where it's snowing inside.
It's snowing,
snow going through the shot. So this beautiful shot now, where he shoots it through the fake snow and the bubbles.
The reaction of Leon that he's waiting there for her and he's seen it all happen. That snow that's That's a great use of
great
elements
parallels between
from Scott.
Also, the vision of the streaked blood underneath the raincoat is quite compelling.
Now the turn of the head and the reveal of the tattoo. Always wondered why it showed up there. Could having to show his badge so he doesn't taken in as a murderer.
Move on. And this is nice because we don't see the strings. We don't see the cables holding the cables.
Right, because in earlier versions you could see some of that. I just noticed in the background you have a pharaoh standing upright just over Deckard's head, over his shoulder. Another use of Egyptian god iconography.
Yeah.
Time for
something outdoor song from the Blade Runner soundtrack was
One More Kiss Dear.
Yeah, we all know that from that soundtrack if we didn't know it before. And of course, you look at the eyes of Edward James Olmos to sort of give him a multiple, sort of a Benetton Nation approach to his multicultural look.
Really striking appearance.
Yeah. He looks kind of unreal as well. You know, he just throws this whole thing, you know, you're not sure who you trust. You know, is everybody a replicant? You know, are there any humans?
Bit of an ominous tone there.
Ominous.
Yeah.
There.
Now we know that Rachel's been added to the list.
He takes you straight back to the cop thriller where Emmett Walsh does. He just sort of grounds it back in that world again. As soon as he opens his mouth, you're like, we're back in that kind of movie again.
It's a fairly important moment between the first and second half of the movie where we're really reestablishing that, he's got a job to do and he's got to keep focused on what's going to be coming up next, because there's still a few replicants out there that are back on Earth about to something pretty intense.
And you're talking about 40 years in the future and 40 years back. If you look at the vehicles in this, also, it very much sells that idea. And that's one of the things I've always loved about this is that, again, it's challenging your perceptions, at least at the time, of what the future really is all about. And not everything is uniform in terms of its newness.
Yes. Scott was intent on that. He said the future grows out of the past and retains bits of it. It's not even. It doesn't grow in some pure way where it cancels the past and rebuilds itself. It grows on other bits, and there's always roots of the past. So that's always true in what how he wanted to depict it.
One thing I always thought that was great about this fight is that, and James said, I'm going to do all my stunts. And Harrison Ford said, well, if Brian's going to do it, I am too. When he gets thrown onto the car, it's him getting, that full hit.
And it's a master class of how Harrison Ford takes a punch and takes a licking and keeps on ticking. If you watch the way he responds, he's always looking, he's adding some shakes and shudders every time he gets punched and throttled.
Or smacked really around like we've got right here.
Is there any actor who's been punched more than Harrison Ford?
and that, you almost got the eyes. What's so wonderful about that, and I think that's why one of the reasons Harrison Ford remains a star, is that he's not afraid to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
He's not the sort of action hero type that we came to expect, especially in the 80s with, Stallone and Schwarzenegger. It's very different. Now,
he's not above getting beat up before he gets to the end of the movie. And then the blood that comes...
Mm-hmm. Well, he doesn't. He's apart from being a reasonably competent detective, he pretty much loses most fights he gets into in the film. He's not a great hero at all. He loses to Batty, he loses to Roy. It's just by chance. He's rescued here by Rachel. He's not that heroic.
The scene coming up is one of the moments that has been discussed a lot about how they were going to push the level of their interaction, what becomes a physical scene, and there were so many issues between the chemistry of Harrison and Sean Young here than just how far they took it. But what they eventually cut down to, I think, does the best work at showing that they've together in all this, instead of going as far as the greased up legs and all the extreme stuff that they had originally intended.
Well, it's a little more of a sort of a rapey situation in certain ways that they filmed it. And they
her against the wall and the slamming of the door, and it's not a good. Again, Deckard is extremely flawed.
But it's asking the audience questions as well. Deckard, on one level, how can we can relate to him because he's dark, but also the question is about, well, she's a machine, is she not? She's a replicant. Why are we having sympathetic feelings towards her? Why should we care? And that's I think the battle he is going through to begin with. Why is he falling for a machine? And obviously at the heart of that is the question he's now beginning to ask himself. If I'm falling for a machine, am I a machine? So there's it embodies his kind of his dilemma, and then throws these questions out to the audience. Why are you so
much internal struggle and
there's the cat eyes for
she is. Young. So we're made well aware constantly that she's
now, of course, she's more human than human, arguably, and so why should we care? Is the fact that I think humans need humanity, whether it's a machine or a human, and I think that's one of the things that this explores. But it's all about connection and companionship, and sometimes, in Japan in present day, you have people who are marrying sex dolls because they don't judge and they're there for them consistently, and sometimes that's all people want or need.
One of the great things I was to say about Rachel is that the more we kind of see her, the more sort of disheveled she becomes as it goes along. So she starts off looking like this perfect doll, and the lipstick, you can still see it some there, but she gradually becomes unraveled and messed up, and her hair comes down.
Eventually the hair down,
and she looks more natural. Right. There's this kind of trajectory from kind of looking unreal to looking very real. But even though we know her to be a replicant, so she sort of emerges as a more human character. There's a great shot.
Which is the thing that all the replicants have.
Yeah, they both had their cat eyes there, so it's pretty.
So
much
there we go. There we are.
You
see them, Deckard's cat eyes there as well.
A question that got brought up for you about things that Deckard is doing throughout the film. The question was, does all of this prove that Deckard is human or just programmed with flaws? It's kind of interesting because of the idea that the replicants, they are programmed as they live and experience things. They do become human, just a way of thing.
Well, of course, Westworld owes a huge gratitude, to Blade Runner, and that's such a wonderful exploration of the imperfection of humanity being programmed and modulated into characters, and to increase the thresholds or reduce the thresholds of various personality traits. And you think by 2019, at least in this universe, that they've kind of they continue to tinker with that.
Yeah, it's very much, because it's kind of the replicant story, and it's very much about, they have gained souls and personalities through experience, the taste of life. That's kind of Batty's great speech is about, I've tasted life, that makes me human. And, that's true for them all. So the question is there any difference anyway? What is it that makes us human? Is it the memories we build up?
We go through how we react to things. Yeah.
Also, another great show that I think is pretty obvious, but I think really wonderfully capitalized on this concept was the reboot of Battlestar Galactica and the Cylons.
Definitely.
And, the Cylons were unmistakable from humans. In fact, they were often sleeper cell humans. But what was really interesting,
they didn't even know that they were androids.
They were seeking out their ultimate humanity, and they were even seeking out God and religion and the answers to their creators. And more so than the human race, who kind of seems to have given up at that point, and they just sort of accept the status quo of God versus God. It's really interesting in comparison to sort of using this as sort of a springboard.
I'm going to say another show that owes a great debt to Blade Runner is the old Small Wonder TV show, if we all remember that.
Yes, Small Wonder. Small Wonder owes a lot. So does Alf, I think.
Another question, Ian, any sense of what Ridley thinks of modern AI conversations? Does he hope for it, expect it, fear it? What do you think after especially taking time to work on a biography with Ridley?
I think he's completely fascinated by it. He spends a lot of time with scientists. He spent a lot of time with NASA, who has a lot of contacts where these kind of subjects come up. I mean, for many, his two Alien prequels, were really more concerned with the idea of creating artificial life and AI than they were really with the alien itself. They were parables about Michael Fassbender's characters and about man playing God.
Dealing with the concept of God and creation and everything.
Yeah. So it's much more, if we created something, who created us? And so these are big questions that have often, fallen into his films that he debates. And I think he is slightly nervous about it and perturbed by it. He's quite a stoic soul. He's from northern Britain, and he doesn't express himself very emotionally as a person. He's rather like Descartes in many ways. But I think he is worried about, are we kind of losing our humanity? Is it being stripped away? Obviously, it was a great Kubrickian dilemma. The 2001 and films like Full Metal Jacket examine, the more programmed we are as human beings, the more artificial we become.
And also
losing our individuality, losing our freedom of choice, and things along those lines too. Yeah,
his unfinished project
that's right.
Finish. So here's the moment where it sort of gets a little questionable in terms of recontextualization, and it's an interesting scene to watch. This sort of
it's an incredibly threatening moment.
It sucks up into the Me Too conversation here.
Yeah, it operates on a lot of levels. Yeah, we understand that Descartes is not a simple soul. He's a dark individual. We understand that there are passions being woken up here. So maybe it's a romantic scene and on some sort of quite forceful level. As you say, the great slats across his face, the light brings you back to film noir and femme fatales and the idea of Postman Always Rings Twice and Double Indemnity. A world
the classic noirs for sure.
Absolutely, where that kind of male-female relationships were never drawn in particularly romantic terms. They were battles and succumbing to passions. But I think, at its heart, I think there was an intention to bring to life Rachel, that she's kind of waking up, to feelings. Again, it's great
literally letting her hair down, literally and figuratively.
And it's grown up. I think Ridley wants, he wanted sci-fi to be freed from the hold of Star Wars, and he wanted it to be dirty, both visually and erotically. People
incredibly mature on many levels, for sure.
Yeah. Advertising, of course, Ridley comes from an advertising background, so it's kind of him. Hoardings, lights, signs. I love that.
We have just finally donning the black paint across her eyes. Came from the influence of Nosferatu and Kinski.
Unicorn in the top right.
Yes.
Toys and creations. It's all there. Look at this. It's fantastic, isn't it? It's
It's almost like
the long nose.
Clearly, that rat has been made.
The expression on that toy to the right with the long nose.
I know. Of course, we've just come from a sex scene, basically, or the beginnings of a sex scene, straight into that, where clearly it's a phallic symbol in the middle of this scene. That constantly happens, doesn't it? It happens with Gaff leaving a little origami, and JF will have stirrings about Press. He's enchanted by her. Again, what makes us human?
The fallen angel concept, and you look over her shoulder and you
Yeah.
have this dangling angel.
Here comes Roy. We eventually get the discussion that she has been keeping JF Sebastian sort of in place until he's able to get in there and eventually make his way to Tyrell directly.
I like that. In fact, they mirror the looks of Deckard and Roy. They have similar shaped coats, and they're kind of echoes.
They both have the long coat and
both have short haircuts. Yet one is bright and white. They're kind of inversions of one another, full of life. Whereas Deckard is brooding and internal and confused. Roy knows what he wants. He wants more life.
Focused, very determined to go from one step to the next to get to his goal. It's an incredible performance too, just like you were saying earlier, how it's very measured, how he's delivering each of these lines and acting with all these other characters.
And the other thing with the replicants, they're 4 years old. They're coming to the age of their lifespan, which is 4 years. So they're infants, they're toddlers. They are children. So we get all these motifs of toys, and it's a world of play. And especially with Pris, she does somersaults and cartwheels. She's has this sort of ballerina, gymnast kind of quality to her. That's constantly reminded that they're not grown up. They can't control their emotions. It's Breon James' sort of determination about his mother, and this is constant kind of reminder that parents and children is a kind of a theme. Who creates who is responsible for who.
And Rutger had gone on to say that he went through all different phases of his performance where he wanted to show each of those different emotions, where he's mature and intense, but also having those moments of childlike and wonder.
That lovely sort of pathetic kiddie-like face, pouting. He's great in it.
The story of how he showed up looking like Roy Batty when he first met Ridley always cracks me up, because Ridley had thought that he was hiring this huge, imposing, really tough-looking guy, and then all of a sudden Rutger shows up to a lunch with his hair cut down, cropped, and completely
wearing
platinumed.
Some kind of outlandish jacket or something. Wasn't he wearing some kind of multicolored jacket, like
some kind of big pink, elaborate, fun thing? That was, his playful nature. And after a little bit of conversation, Ridley, 100%, this is my guy. It would wind up being one of the most iconic figures in all of sci-fi.
You look at that chess table, and it's all birds, it's all owls. You've got that original look from the Tyrell Corporation, where the first replicant you see is an owl.
So it links you back to Tyrell, because obviously he's the opponent. Of course, JF can see straight away who they are. I designed your minds.
I believe that they're Nexus 6. Their background is really interesting too, because they were essentially just labor androids on this planet that was under extreme turmoil, and I think there was a war element too, until they were able to break away and get back to Earth to figure out if they could live longer than what they were programmed.
Yeah, it's the idea of slave labor comes into it. There's a kind of class element to the film. We get a stratified city where Tyrell lives at the top of his pyramid in his wonderful office and penthouse. Yet at the bottom, literally the bottom of the streets are full of kind of workers and the poor and the sort of destitute. And the people just kind of scrabbling a living. And then you also have this idea of slave labor coming into it. It's quite a view of society that Scott was trying to sort of look at.
Also, to a degree, Pris just showed that they have superhuman ability.
Yes.
Which, earlier on, Leon was able to reach into the eyes and he didn't have his hand completely frozen. Pris is showing she can't feel that kind of pain or get boiled. So they're imposing in that regard.
I always find it ironic that he has this malady which gives him enhanced aging.
Yes,
and he's appears, and that of course plays directly into the replicant element. But it's also amusing to me that in my age now that I've crossed the 50 mark, he doesn't look that old.
Because yes, he has limited.
He's supposed to be
lifespan.
early 20s, I think. Limited. He's supposed to be early 20s, I think. The brilliant child scientist, inventor sort of figure. That's what his role is.
Mm-hmm.
Very naive, but also very aware of what's going on. Even though to a degree he's essentially powerless and winds up becoming a victim of their plot. Thing I love too is this music cue that's playing, which eventually gets amplified later on when we see Roy looking up in the elevator. This is some of the music for the film from Vangelis that never made it out until I think around the time that the final cut was released, and they did an expanded version of the soundtrack.
Also, they're playing up the sound design here quite a bit with the bubbling, the boiling water, where basically it plays the implied threat.
Yeah,
he knows the score. He knows that he has to comply, otherwise he'll die because he's threatened. But
so this knowing look between each other too.
Yeah,
and Roy looking into each other's eyes.
But selling it up with that boiling water that's basically going to be his fate if he doesn't comply. And there you could see that practical application of his age makeup much better with this lighting.
Yeah.
Strobing in the blue hue again. Incredible visual position here.
We also have a mention Minority Report in terms of the way we have a vision of the future and in terms of the technology as well, in terms of convenience and inconvenience, which is pretty cool. The exterior of the Tyrell building reminded me of that, of the whole maglev situation. And all that.
There he is, Joe Turkel.
Yes.
He's a very big bed. I like his bed.
Themes in religion too, and temple-like structures. This always kind of made me think his office, loft, house, whatever this is almost sort of cathedral-like, especially with all of the candles everywhere.
Yeah.
And he is indeed practically blind, and he needs those Coke bottle glasses for real.
It's very much, it's a kind of step into the Gothic at this point. This is kind of La Belle La Bête. This is fairy tale language that Scott suddenly moved into. They've come to meet the wizard now, who's going to might bestow eternal life. Of course, that he won't. So it's kind of the kind of elements of the film change around them as he kind of shifts the story.
If you take a look at their different chess boards, he now has one that's more of a sort of a classic keeper of the castle version, where William Sanderson had the birds because he's the maker of the creatures, and so each is representative of their character and who they are and what they represent. It's pretty cool.
That line, milk and cookies kept you awake.
That kind of stuff with the symbolism of a chessboard.
Now they've got the entrance, the throne room, essentially. Going to be both of their undoing. The eyes, the way that effect was created, was really fascinating. You think about the background of that, Ian?
The shots in the eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the technical details were very complicated. And I think, again, it was something that Scott wanted to inject early on. It's one of his arguments about, he was sort of set on his kind of idea that they were replicants, and you needed to translate the idea of replicants, and he would hint that in Harrison Ford. So I think that came in very early on. Do you know how they do the effect? I don't actually know the technical elements of it.
Yeah, there's a certain angle that you can capture. It's very difficult, but it's really essentially a strategic placement and reflection. But it's very hard to capture.
It was very difficult, wasn't it? I know that it was one of the frustrations to try and get it to work.
We're going to get it with Roy, and one of the best lines of the entire film. It is. Which always is discussed about whether he's saying father or the alternate.
I was going to say that
PG-13 for everyone.
There's a whole eye element that goes throughout this film, strategically placed, and of course, the age-old eye is the window to the soul. And
Absolutely.
it's very much playing on that theme.
Of course, it's the first thing you see in the film is an eye.
Mm-hmm.
You don't
Holden's eye looking out. Yeah.
It's looking out, and it's very much. It's all about seeing.
This whole dialogue that's going on is just fascinating because there's want, a need, and a degree of hatred coming from Roy towards Tyrell.
Well, this is confrontation with God, basically, isn't it?
God and the father at the same time. Yeah.
And he's fallen apart. He's sort of at the end of his rope here, and I love how sweaty he is. The circles under his eyes are getting dark.
Yeah. God is a disappointment. He's come to meet his maker, and his maker has let him down.
Which some can interpret as sort of a nihilistic perspective. At the same time, though, it's these kinds of questions that make this type of heavy, hard sci-fi really fleshed out into, a human degree. It's fascinating how these elements are in the plot.
Exactly. Any element of when we hit our teens and we get that rebellious nature, there's a certain crossover at that certain time in your life where you realize that your parents aren't the gods you always thought they were. And
they are
just
fallible.
Fallible human beings. And you have to grapple with the fact that that's okay and you love them anyway, or are they disappointments? And it takes time for people. And this is kind of a realization of that moment.
Edgar's playing into that, being the sort of humbled child until he becomes the killer. The different iterations of this have always fascinated me, how there's a fake head that was made to basically explode in blood. This is what we wound up getting.
It's a kiss of death.
This is pretty intense.
Unbelievably dark. Again, going for the eyes. Sebastian is looking on in horror.
See, he doesn't enjoy killing. No one enjoys violence in this film. It's kind of
I think Deckard's pretty okay with it for the most part.
Every time Deckard shoots or kills, he always goes for a drink. It's that film noir thing.
Aaron is asking you, Ian, if you could comment on the values of the 80s versus other eras, I'm assuming in relation to Blade Runner.
Is that in relation to the texture of the film? I suppose fundamentally, it's the question of if you look forward, CGI, would have made this film a very different experience. Let me just turn my volume down a little bit so I can speak better. I'm just getting to the Vangelis music there a bit.
It's great. It's a great swelling of the choral. Yeah.
I have to just say real quick before you answer that question. After the kill, the first thing you see is the tunnel, which is symbolic of birth. Yes. Where he's basically, destroyed his father and now he's reborn as his own entity.
There's a great shot in the lift as he sort of departs. You realise he's killed both of them, and he looks up and he sees stars.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of a bit of a Lucifer reference. It's the fall of the angel of light. It's the kind of heavens.
And the only time you should be able to a clear sky.
A clear sky. It's meant to be smoggy. Where's that clear sky come from? But it's a quick symbolic.
There's an alternate take of that too, where he's holding J.F. Sebastian's coat. So we get the implication more than just the discussion and dialogue here that right after killing Tyrell, he killed J.F.
Yeah.
Here's another shot where they got rid of the wires, which I'm glad they did.
Just go back to the 80s-ness of the film. Obviously, the physicality of it, the creation of sets, the astonishing physicality of the creation of rain and sort of the look of the film. It has this great texture.
Absolutely.
Which I don't think you would get if you kind of flooded it with CGI. I mean, Scott, to be fair to him, has stuck by physical filmmaking as much as he can. There is CGI in his later films, and when he feels the need for it. But he's not an advocate in the way that James Cameron and a lot of those other 80s filmmakers maybe have become. But I think
incredible shot here of Sid Mead's influence.
The guy stealing stuff off the back of the car. But I think, funny enough, I wouldn't say Blade Runner was necessarily wholly an 80s movie in the sense that, maybe you think of them. Because it has this classicism in it. it wants to be a 1940s film. You know, when Sean Young auditioned, they put her in a coat that was worn by Greta Garbo. They found it in the wardrobe department, and I think she wears it in certain elements. You know, so Scott wanted to draw on old Hollywood, and that's kind of there in this film. This is you know, these shots are almost Dickensian. You know, they speak of something, you know, very old fashioned. $1 Million Across the Road there.
Like influences of Lang and so many others.
Yeah. It's not, you know, broadly an 80s, not in mood either. You know, 80s is very upbeat. You know, it's in comparison I'd probably make is that compare Cameron's Aliens to Scott's Alien, and Cameron's Aliens is a very 80s film. It's terrific. You know, characters and fast moving. It's cool. You know,
incredible action,
great
pacing,
one-liner.
bombastic.
Yeah, really kind of, you know, huge amounts of energy and fun. Alien is intense and complicated and almost 70s in its feel. And I think Blade Runner is a bit of both. You know, it has the visual elements that sort of Scott was coming into his own with, but it has that kind of old-fashioned feel to it. It's very moody. It's very glow.
The look was incredibly, just the sheen of this film was very influential. And everyone from MTV to Alan Parker to even Ridley, you know, Tony Scott himself, they became known for these incredibly polished looks. And if anything, whether the film was going to be good or not, it was worth the price of admission just for the actual look and polish of the film.
Absolutely. And it draws back, actually, because Scott's background is not film school. It's advertising, you know, and he made over something like 2,000 ads he'd shot before he became a filmmaker. And ads were all fundamentally about desire, about stirring desire in the watcher, in the viewer. And I think, you know, especially with Scott and his brother, and then, as you say, Alan Parker and Hugh Hudson and all the kind of British advertising filmmakers who sort of went to LA in the early 80s and created this kind of British movement. This was their thing. It was about the look. You know, we're showing a world that's decrepit but hugely desirable at the same time. It was about something. They were selling us something in a strange way, appealing to our desire.
I love the stack of books just randomly in the center. Also, I love this moment where Pris is she's expiring ever so slightly too.
This is actually a subtle in-joke to The Duelists, which is Ridley Scott's first film. Where
with Harvey Keitel.
Harvey Keitel and Keith Carradine. There's a scene where they go and meet Albert Finney's character. He's a cameo in it. And it's in this very kind of Napoleonic setting. A bit very much like this, but obviously a bit more historically accurate. And then to make a scene work, his designer had put books on the floor. They just stacked them there before the doorway. And Scott has made the frame for Scott for some reason. There's no logical reason why these books would be on the floor. They were just piled up by this doorway. And Scott went, that's how it should look. That makes this scene. It creates it. You couldn't explain why.
Well, and I think it also implies that he's a well-read, a hyper-intelligent person. And he's got so many books that he just piles them up in there.
Do you notice the doll in the background relates back to the guy in the bar? They're a spitting image for one another.
Mm-hmm.
The doll just passed. This is kind of weird echo of, you know, who's a replicant and who's not a replicant.
Right.
And here we have a guy being beaten up by a girl.
In some shots, there's the male gymnast, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Xenia on your top.
Fingers up the nose.
The Bond villainess.
Yeah.
Famke Janssen.
The story was they got a gymnast who body doubled for Daryl Hannah, who was just there by chance.
This is the most frightening moment. One of my favorite moments of Blade Runner.
Screaming and writhing.
She just doesn't die. And
Interestingly enough, this always kind of reminds me a little bit too of the film The Hunger, which was done by Ridley's brother.
Yes, yeah, they've got a similar atmosphere, very much so, about vampires. And that's about longevity and immortality, and and
disposability of relationships as well.
Yeah, she's a machine malfunctioning. It's really weird, isn't it? It's like spasming,
itching out and spasming, and
yes, it is great,
gyrating in all directions. And what we get here in a little bit with the way that Rutger plays up the sorrow, her loss, I think is incredibly well done.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyone
just
who
this
hasn't
imposing
seen
figure as he's coming down the hallway, it's all so good. This is now the shift where we get to the final conflict of the film.
Yes.
Everything
the
from here is
the duelists have now come together. It's
exactly cat and mouse, the whole back and forth.
Duel of the ultimate collar fashion.
I just pointed out that Rutger Hauer said he didn't like the idea of Roy Batty and Deckard having a kung fu fight for the final ending, and that he suggested the idea of the chase that we get, which I think is just brilliant because it adds so much to the way that the characters have flipped. How Deckard is the one who's on the run.
And it's children again. It's hide and seek. It's a game. Yeah. Come out wherever you are. It's
Roy shoves his head through the wall and sees them, and there's so many moments. It's a playful, extreme threat. Is the kiss goodbye?
The kiss goodbye, pushing the tongue back in, kind of like the closing of the eyes.
Yeah. The respect for the dead. Yeah, even though they're replicants, they're still at their character.
Yes, they've created. A religious system. They have their kind of sense of, honoring the dead. That's a good shot, isn't it? Look at that shot. Wow.
Also, the fact that we don't see Roy talking, that his voice has now almost become like this omnipresent.
Yeah.
This is one of the all-time great shots in cinema, as far as I'm concerned. You just have the water trickling down, the amazing lighting with the strobe light, and then the last thing you expect is Roy Batty's hand.
Oh God! And then the breaking fingers. Oh. Always. This is one of those moments that talking about. I mean, that's one of the historic sci-fi props for sure.
Oh.
Yeah.
See, this is what we were afraid of in Dune and Flash Gordon. If you stick your hand in a hole, that's going to happen.
Yes.
Also funny is he doesn't break a finger for Leon. So.
Leon can sort himself out. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And James has it covered. No problem there.
It's fascinating to me
that after a bit.
One thing that Roy seems to be obsessed with is kind of fair play.
On the blasted ear too.
Yeah.
That's right, because he says, later on, that's very unsportsmanlike of you.
Yeah, he wants the world to operate properly. He feels he's been poorly treated by the universe. And he's sort of determined to...
Also, it gives him nuance. He's not just a malevolent killer. He's got his motivations. I mean, he's not here to kill Deckard.
Have a sense of sportsmanship.
Survival, yeah.
It's the understanding, too, that the inevitability of death is approaching. He wasn't able to get more life from Tyrell. And a thing about the Tyrell confrontation, too, is in some developments of the scripts, Tyrell was a replicant, and then he goes up a further floor and finds the real Tyrell dead for over 4 years in a glass coffin.
Preserved, yeah.
I just jumped in with the, here's Batty.
He's
howl.
Crying. It's
He's also sort of painting his face in tribute to Pris to a certain degree.
Bit of war paint.
Yeah.
Harrison playing up that great reacting to pain.
Great sound editing there.
Now, this is the howl that signifies I'm coming.
Now, this is 1 year after the Year of the Werewolf. Was it inspired by American Werewolf, The Howling, and Full Moon High? You tell me.
I think we're all for the better that Roy doesn't turn into a werewolf.
And Wolfen.
Might have turned everything on its head.
But he's just spilling out of genre, isn't he? He's spilling out of sci-fi into horror and other elements. He won't be contained by one genre. It's a story.
Mm-hmm.
It's a detective story. It's sci-fi. Now it's horror movie. Can't get away. It's the relentless stalker.
I mean, even this shot right here, as he's running down through the open doors, is a bit nightmarish to a degree with the whispering, the dialogue, and loss of the gun.
inspired by elements of this where you just have this relentless machine pursuer that won't give up.
Yes. Oh, and that shot of him looking through the chain link, put it up right there.
He's kind of mad now, isn't he?
Now, is this rebirth? Yeah. Who knows? It always seems to be whenever someone's climbing out of a hole.
Yes, it's definitely a birth motif, isn't it? You know, it's never more perfected than in Raising Arizona. When the two guys escape from prison, they're born back into the world.
Now we get the mirror of that shot from before where we see the clenching of the fist. And
it's the malfunctioning now, isn't it?
He's starting to lose the ability of his hand, so he has to inject this huge level of pain
and it also
keep going for a little bit longer.
They're doppelgangers at this point because they both have malfunctioning hands.
So it's the parallels again. They are kind of brothers. They're fellow replicants. Yeah. Although there's a big Christ-like thing going on here, obviously, with the kind of the stigmata. But he was throwing a lot into the suit, Ridley. He was throwing it all in. Yeah. So it's become a very European film now, though, hasn't it? You know, there's very little dialogue. It's all symbolism. You know, it's all imagery.
And going back to Tarkovsky influence, maybe a little bit. Just the use of water as an element of motion and
it's little wonder his producers were a bit perplexed. You know, they were a bit like, "What were you doing?"
There was clash between and Warner Brothers when he was showing rushes. There were 15 plus 20 odd takes of different scenes that they thought was too excessive, and sometimes he had been quoted to say that was intentional, telling them, "I know what I'm doing, and I'm doing what I want, and some excess for you."
Here's the planting of the birds.
Yeah, but you couldn't see it on set. It's incredible. One of the great dilemmas was that on set it didn't look like this, and that all his associate producers were saying as soon as you looked in the viewfinder, there was Blade Runner. It was astonishing, but on set it was kind of chaotic and difficult to see, and that was what they were all kind of railing against. Like, what is this thing you want, Ridley? And it was only when you looked at the kind of dailies, they went, "Okay, we get it." You know, I see at last. You know, there's real Mobius shot to the depths. They're very Mobius.
I think what we become so enamored with Roy Batty at this scene because of his dialogue and his spirit.
Yeah, the unsportsmanlike mention.
And he's clearly enjoying the game.
Where are you going?
I always think it's like Roy Batty, you know, this is like Batman, you know, he's the Joker. You know, he's like a Batman villain and this great kind of Gotham behind them. And Scott's not a big fan of superhero movies, but there's like an element of that here. The brooding Batman versus the kind of mad, excitable
the colorful, the villains always have more fun. And this is very true in this film.
I could also absolutely see Tim Burton taking a little bit of influence from what Lee Scott was able to pull off with this.
This moment is also directly taken from Alien as well. It's sort of a running motif in his films as well, where you have this sort of hand and then the face reappearing in an intensely full pressure situation. When Ripley is trying to find her way back after she's got to turn off Mother from destroying the entire ship. One of the great shots where you're literally focusing in on the beads of sweat on her fingers. It's such a great shot.
He does do agony well, doesn't he? You can feel every we
can feel it with him for sure.
It's not the years, it's the mileage.
Now, these two sets were on wheels, and they can draw them closer and further apart. It was a kind of this is the last night of production when they were absolutely at their wits' end. And they did it by using sets where they could sort of draw them close and pull them apart to make the jump possible for the stuntman. And then they could widen the gap again for the subsequent shots.
That's cheating.
Isn't it filmmaking? And there's kind of this idea of the failed air conditioning, the failed life support system on the roof. It's like life is ebbing away. So
the fans slowing down
more and more.
The fans
are slowing down, and it's all kind of coming apart.
Again, that huge swell of the score again.
Yeah.
On different instruments that are adding so much character to it.
And once again, Harrison Ford misjudging a jump across a chasm.
Yeah. He doesn't. Spatial awareness has never been his strong point. But,
the sets that they're on, where you got Harrison hanging, that was what, 10, 15 feet of a platform? There's some really fun behind the scenes images of Harrison just dropping himself, falling onto the bags below.
And here's
the dove.
Before that moment, he was carrying the dove. So a lot of people, I myself included, always are like, "Where'd that dove come from?" But he did kind of grab it earlier on.
It's like living in the rooftops, isn't it, or something of the building, or the loft. But they say it's got to be a replicant dove.
That was the thing that was in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, was going up to the roof and caring for his birds. There's also a class issue. Everyone could that.
Yes.
An experience to live in fear, isn't it?
So the great question arises is, why does Roy save him? And there were different versions of how they were going to do the scene. There was going to be a scene where he sort of almost drags Roy over, or Roy almost drags him to his death when he dies, and still hanging on to him. But I think, in the end, Scott's take on it was simply that he wanted someone to witness his death. He wanted the moment to matter. His whole life to matter. So that's why we get this incredible speech, and why we get this incredible moment, because life has to mean something.
Even have a story behind this speech, because I know the speech was not scripted.
Well, it's a bit of both, really. There was a lot written by both Peoples and Fancher. That I think what more was the case. This comes from Paul Salmon's book, Future Noir. Was I think what Rutger Hauer did was sort of shrink it down. He actually had to cut back into it and located lines, and then added "Time to Die" at the end. And basically he just dragged Scott off the set while he was preparing stuff. Said, "Listen to this," and Scott just went, "Just do whatever you want," and it turned into one of the greatest scenes in cinema history.
That was the thing that Peoples has mentioned too, is that during a couple of readings, Edgar would go off on a couple of tangents and then just kind of give him a side-eye glance.
Yeah.
Show that he had some ideas for what this would eventually be. What he put together for this, I think there's no way this monologue could have been any better. Love too that on the soundtrack, it's not just the music, it's also Edgar and recording too. Here it goes.
And who hasn't dreamt of what sea beams glittering, attack ships of fire on
the shoulder of
Orion? Yeah. There's things you dream of, and they should never be seen. They should never be shot by anyone, because it's the element of dream in the film. You've got to have this level of imagination. There's the dove going.
Just slightly, it's become
the dove goes, and
motion.
His soul going to heaven.
Yeah.
Or whatever replicant heaven may be.
Lexicon in the group just said it reflects on exactly what Leon said earlier, "Time to Die," which is a major theme.
Yeah.
Death and life and what all of it means.
And of course, you're going back to Ridley Scott grappling with the death of his brother and leaving after a year of prepping Dune, deciding what's my motivation to go back? This might be the culmination of that.
It's interesting that after Tony died, that was the point he got serious about Blade Runner, the sequel to Blade Runner. Obviously, he didn't end up directing it, but Blade Runner has this very personal relationship with the way I think Ridley thinks and feels. It is his most personal film.
We get those lines from Gaff.
Finished. Too bad she won't live.
Then again, who does?
Who does? Exactly.
Here's another major bit of importance between the different versions. Do you want to kind of go into what your thoughts on this are, Ian?
In terms of the ending, for me, it's the absolute perfect ending is the director's cut. He goes back in. He thinks she's dead. She's already been. Gaffer's got to her, but she's not. She's alive. But they are going to be hunted. It's the kind of we're going to get away, and of course
someone's going to be after them, whether it's Gaff or another Blade Runner.
Yeah, it's the pregnant ending in the sense that they will always be running.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of, and we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit because there's a bit of work to be done in the scene. But
sure. But also here we have images that were reused from Alien, which we could talk about for a second.
Yes, on the screens, and there's a lot of that actually. All the computer screens in the spinners are literally just a lift of the stuff he used on the bridge of the Nostromo.
Mm-hmm.
He just reused it. I think he changed the color of it a little bit, but clearly the same programming software was being used on the Nostromo and down on Earth. Because
they look great in this setting. They look like they fit right in.
Yeah, it's Scott's eye, isn't it? It's the perfect flickering of movement within a shot. And yes, you're kind of led to expect, is she dead? But no. Yeah. But it's kind of the demand had come for a happy ending. It was such a brooding film, and in 1982, it was the summer of E.T. and Reagan was in the Oval Office, and no one was in the mood for a film this downbeat.
This and John Carpenter's The Thing notoriously
two
out.
Classics. The E.T. 2 is a classic. Don't get me wrong, but people just weren't ready to think about their sci-fi in quite the way that we now think about Blade Runner. So there's kind of an interesting kind of a parallel between the eras the original was launched into in the early 80s and the early 90s, in which the director's cut was launched into, when the film had become this kind of cult item.
Filmmaking also at the time, it kind of evolved, sort of in the wake of Star Wars was sort of like a clean break from the gritty views of the 70s, where everything was sort of a post-Watergate cynicism, and Star Wars was sort of a break from that, saying, listen, we could fantasize and it could be a happy ending. So that did so well, even with the Close Encounters with such a positive ending. Then Blade Runner comes along, and it's such a dark and dry response to that.
Empire Strikes Back too, a little bit.
Yeah,
1980, because it sort of ended on that note. But
of course, there we have.
You were talking about, Ian, the director's cut ending. Here, we don't get them driving off into the sunset. It's just that shut of the of the elevator, and that's it.
And it's the beautiful time with the music. It's the revelation as he's looked at it, and maybe he now realizes he's a replica. Ridley would say that. And then this fantastic music from Vangelis kicks in.
Right.
But to me, it's such a hanging ending now. It's in some ways you almost I did enjoy the sequel. You don't need the sequel because that's how it should finish. Unknown. It's pregnant with possibility.
And the music here sort of injects an urgency of let's go on to the next chapter. Yeah, you don't have to tie it all up.
Just powerfully driving. It's such a great track to end the credits on for sure.
And when if you watch the original, it's like, where did all that countryside come from? The world's wrecked. There's all this sunshine. There's a glint of sunshine through their windscreen.
Get up to Big Bear or something, or
they were driving to the Overlook Hotel, so
they went. So it wasn't going to be that cheery an ending, really. They got to the Overlook, but that all came to Ivor Powell, who is Ridley's assistant and associate producer, and he'd been an assistant of Stanley Kubrick's on 2001, and he called up Stanley, and Stanley and Kubrick had loved Alien. And he got on the phone and called Ridley back and said, I loved Alien, and they had this kind of great conversation. Of course, Ridley was a huge fan. And Ridley told him, we've got this problem, and apparently you've got all these outtakes from The Shining and the shots of the car driving on the road to the Overlook. And Stanley said, you can't use anything I shot or put into the film, but you're welcome to have a look. And he sends over something like 14 hours of footage arrived. These canisters from the outtakes from The Shining, which poor old Ridley and his team had to kind of work their way through. I don't know whether he got through all of them because he only needed certain kind of shots, but it's so kind of Stanley. Yes, I kept every single second of footage from The Shining.
Ian, thank you so much for joining us. This was an absolute great time. Everybody in the group right now is talking about how this movie gets better each and every time we see it, and I have to completely agree. But it was a really, really great pleasure having your input and talking with you during the film. It was great.
Absolutely. It was great. Yeah. There were things again, you guys pointed out stuff I hadn't really looked at. And, as I say, it's a film that constantly talks to you and constantly throws up things, and you'll never stop learning about Blade Runner.
Ian, tell us a little bit about what you'd love to share in terms of the work, Terminator Vault, Alien Vault, the stuff you've done and what you have coming up.
Yes, please.
Well, basically, I wrote a book about Alien Vault, which I kind of did an updated version of to include the stuff on Ridley's prequels, a mixed reception that they've got. And then I wrote a book called Terminator Vault that came out a few years ago about the history of the first two films, the two proper ones. So I've had a kind of sci-fi film. I've written books about the Coen brothers. I've written books about Quentin Tarantino. And this last year, luckily, I got to write a book about Ridley Scott. It was such a pleasure in terms of not only Blade Runner and Alien, films I knew very well, but just his whole oeuvre. It's fascinating stuff there, and contradictory stuff, and complicated stuff, and films that didn't work, and other films that do work. The films I went back to and discovered how good they were. I mean, Black Hawk Down, what an astonishing film that is.
Mm-hmm.
And he's an enigmatic man, Scott, an enigmatic artist. You read the kind of likes of Tarantino or someone like James Cameron, and they're great kind of self-mythologizers. Every time they're interviewed, they write their own biography. They give you the lines, and they give you the kind of the great stories. Ridley is elusive. He talks about technical things very well, but he doesn't engage with, the big debates. He won't do it. He's too kind of northern and British. And, but I find him,
his cards.
But I think he's a true artist. Literally, he paints, and he went to art school and he studied with artists, and I think he has that in him. He could have been an artist. And I think you look at Blade Runner, no one else could have created that. He has maybe the best eye there is. And there are many, from Fritz Lang to Spielberg to De Palma to Kubrick, who have wonderful, wonderful eyes. But I think Scott's eye just does things that, I've never seen anywhere else.
Again, thank you so much. This has been an amazing time. Everybody listening in, thank you for joining us during the watch party.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I'm glad you're all still with us.
Everyone, if you go out and love the watch party and joining us today, please spread the word. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, wherever you are. And folks know we are now within the final hours of the campaign for In Search of Tomorrow. So tell everyone you can. And again, thank you so much for being part of the community, because this is what it's all about for sure. David, thank you again, as always, as being a part of this. Do you want to talk about anything In Search of Tomorrow-wise before we get going?
No. I just want to echo everyone's sentiments. Ian, it was an absolute pleasure to have you here, and I look forward to including you in Search of Tomorrow as well, to talk about Blade Runner and Ridley Scott and all sorts of things, sci-fi, all your personal favorites and guilty pleasures. It all qualifies. And for everyone, thank you for being along with us for all these watch parties. Thank you, Andrew and Carla and everyone involved, making this such a fun and informative event. And like Andrew said, it's very important for all of us to spread the good word about not only In Search of Tomorrow, but just about fandom and sci-fi. And if you're really enjoying this, share the love and invite people to join us as we continue this journey, because we're now going to be making a movie and ingratiating everyone in the process.
Also, everyone who's asking, next week, Up next on Sunday, we have Flash Gordon, which is going to be a great time. So come back on the 24th and get ready for Flash.
Yes. Flash.
Flash. Oh, yeah, 48 hours to save the Earth.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you guys soon.
Okay.